You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin, with co-host Jacob Szymanski and technical producer Nasreen Abdelmajid. And we're all coming in on this question. Who has read 50 Shades of Grey? The trilogy, the first book. I will even go as far as to ask if you've watched the movies, it'll somewhat count. Nasreen, starting with you.
I've never watched it. I've never read it. I was never really interested in it.
Okay.
And I feel like it was trending for such a long time that I'm like, should I get on it? Should I not? But it never really fully pulled me in.
Scared you away, did it?
Yeah.
All the popularity of 50 Shades. Jay?
I've never read the whole thing, but I was always fascinated with it. So I've read a bunch of samples from it and excerpts to the point where I've probably read like half of it.
Like you know what it's about.
Oh, yeah, I know what it's about. And I'm the one that picked the quote of the day today, which was from 50 Shades of Grey for reasons that we'll find out a little later.
Mm-hmm. But so if you're not familiar, 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James, S&M, right? They didn't refer to it as BDSM stuff. They talked about it as S&M.
What is S&M?
Content. Sadism, masochism,
Oh.
That's...
Am I supposed to know that?
What? Okay. Anyways, this is the content around 50 Shades of Grey. I am not. Everybody go and Google it if you're completely unfamiliar. But the reason why we're bringing it up, Jacob, you were going to say.
Mm-hmm. I was having fun looking for a quote from this book, going on the Goodreads quote page, which is hilarious because I think people are kind of trolling because they're picking quotes in the book that are like really bad.
Yeah.
Like usually you're supposed to pick the most thought-provoking ones and powerful quotes, but in here they're just like choosing like the worst ones. I think it's kind of a trolling campaign, to be honest.
Give us some examples.
I can't read the vast majority of them, but one of them here is, "I feel the heat rising in my cheeks again. I must be the color of the Communist Manifesto."
Is that a real quote?
That's a real
from
quote.
the book?
Or my favorite, "My inner goddess is jumping up and down, clapping her hands like a 5-year-old."
Oh, no way. She said inner goddess and 5-year-old in the same sentence in context of this book. Oh my God.
That is so disturbing in so many ways. I can't.
I highly recommend anyone go see that page. It's hilarious. That's the Goodreads quote page for 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James.
Don't even worry about reading the book. Just go to Goodreads and read the quotes because, woo. Yeah, anyways, okay, more generally, the book is categorized as erotica. And I think we're going to get into our taboo topics again because this is part 2. There's just so many good things we want to get to. We barely scratched the surface last time we brought up taboo topics. But on today's episode, we will take a look at the CELA homepage. Shout out our friends from the Center for Equitable Library Access. Also, Know Your Narrator is on the docket today with Sara Hillis. She's featuring longtime legendary narrator George Guidall. So we'll get to who that is and why he's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But taboo topics, people. This discussion continues, and I guess the good place to start is love times 3.
Mm-hmm. Debbie wrote this one in, eh?
Yes, Debbie Williams, my friend and neighbor, wrote to us about Love Times 3, and this is the title of the book, Our True Story of a Polygamous Marriage by Joe Darger, Vicky Darger, Valerie Darger, and Brooke Adams. So it's about polygamy, and I want to kind of tell you what it's about because it's pretty juicy and very taboo, for me at least. Written in the voices of the 4 parents, Love Times 3 is the story of one man, his 3 wives, and their 24 children as they live out their faith in a world of prejudice, misconception, and fear. This includes a chapter on the sister-wife dynamic, one from Joe on how he juggles his 3 distinctive romantic relationships, and a chapter from 3 of their children called My 3 Moms. Despite the risk of legal action... The Dargers know it's time to counteract Hollywood's sensational interpretation and correct the general public's misunderstanding of polygamy with the truth. Now, for the first time, Joe, Alina, Vicky, and Valerie Darger, I don't know if it's Darger or Darger, I've said both now, lift the veil on their so-called taboo way of life. Okay. I mean, if that is enough to talk about, then I don't know what is.
You know, in looking into this book, excuse me, in looking into this book, one of the things that I saw in a couple of reviews is that this book is like somewhat mundane, and it seems that that's the point because there's a bunch of reality TV shows on TLC and stuff that portray the polygamous lifestyle as being this like outlandish, crazy, dramatic lifestyle. And I think what this book is trying to do is to normalize it. Like, it seems to be explicitly advocating for the lifestyle.
That's true. I think that it feels a little outdated to me, okay? And hear me out. I don't know much about polygamy, and I don't listen
Outdated
to
how?
it. Like, not outdated, but it's almost like we're sensationalizing polygamy, but I think we're a little further ahead than that. So there are a lot of podcasts now and, you know, reality TV shows and all kinds of things where polygamy is being explored. I wouldn't say it's not taboo, obviously, because it's not the regular way of life. But maybe since the release of this book, there's just been so much more on polygamy that it doesn't feel as glorified as it once did.
And it was released in 2011, if you're curious.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So 12 years ago. Dan Savage has a podcast, and it just does so much work around, you know, monogamish relationships. And I think that was kind of like an opening into this kind of conversation. So that's one thing that I would point to as just like a huge content creator, a huge exploration into polygamy. But with books like this, it really does depend on the reader, right? Like, if you're going into it thinking, oh my goodness, which is what Debbie describes her experience as, she's still asking the questions like, people sharing partners, that is wild to think about. You know, normalizing women sharing men and each other, but not the other way around being as popularized.
Yeah, that's right. That really seems to be the typical way that polygamy is done. It's like men with multiple wives, but never the other way around. And why is that?
Mm-hmm. And then religion.
Right. Well, the religious aspect is one of the main reasons why people feel uncomfortable from it, because it's like, especially in Catholicism and Christianity, like they're not cool with polygamy.
Because monogamy is the only way of life.
Mm-hmm.
Religiously speaking.
There is a book series that I was a really big fan of, The Wheel of Time, which I'm a huge fan of that book series, and it recently got an adaptation on Amazon Prime. And one of the aspects of the book series that I'm really curious to see how Amazon is going to be adapting is there is a polygamous relationship in the books, and I don't know how they're going to handle it in the show and see if people are open to it, because it literally is a main character, like a male who has like 3 wives. Spoiler alert. And I don't know how they're going to portray that. Like, and I don't even know if they're going to keep it in, and it'll be an interesting...
Like, if it's too taboo to make the cut?
Yeah, I'm really wondering what they're going to do with that. Although it's probably not going to come for another couple seasons still, but it'll be an interesting benchmark on where the zeitgeist is right now in terms of where society stands with polygamy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a fair question. Like, in 2023, where are we at, right? And that's what I meant earlier when this book was released in 2011. It's like, oh my gosh. But honestly, 12 years later, at least coming from my perspective, it's like, it's just a little too glorified, I think. But on TV, it almost feels like a different game. You know, it's that question of like prime time, or, you know, are we ready for that yet?
We'll see. We'll touch base when we know more about that.
But when we're talking about sex being taboo, in literature, I think there are a lot of places to go with that. 50 Shades of Grey, as I said, the BDSM, the S&M side of things, but also just erotica in general. You know, there's a lot of like guilty pleasure aspects when you read books like this. You're not necessarily just outwardly recommending, or you associate certain books with certain parts of our population. Like, oh, this is a YA book, a young adult book. I don't think that anybody over a certain age would read this. Or most, like, typically women are reading books like this and not men. But I think that's why when 50 Shades hit the market, it was so it went viral.
It was definitely a moment
Yep.
that we all remember, like, having discussions with people about this book and like what it was all about. And like so many people read it. It was absolutely like a big moment in pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd argue that sex is the ultimate taboo.
You think so?
Is it not?
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
It is.
You would agree with yourself? Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with myself all the time.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you because sex itself is not just one topic. It's like an umbrella of, right? And there's so much to argue about, I think. Like with the S&M side of things, we're talking like sex toys. That becomes a part of the question. We're talking about, what do they call it? Like sadomasochism? Just violence in sex, consensual violence.
Yeah,
in sex.
which are themes that are like explicitly explored in this book.
Yes.
And I'd argue that 50 Shades of Grey got as popular as it did because of taboos.
Yeah.
Because it was so exciting to learn about these things about BDSM and the other one.
S&M. Yeah.
S&M, yes. It was so exciting to learn about these things. Then you talk to your friends about it and be like, what is that all about? And
Right.
it was like a dirty little secret everybody was
Exactly.
in on. And it was kind of exciting,
Yeah.
you know?
Role playing, right? Role playing where they're using taboos outright, like, she's submissive and this is the kind of role that she would play and that stuff. Honestly, it even got, I would say, more divided when the movies came out. Because when you're reading it, you're almost reading it privately, right? Like in your own homes, talking about it in whispers. Then the movies come out, everyone's out there in the theaters, and it was just
sharing a room?
outrageous. Yes.
In the same room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like there
that's
were scenes that
very
made people
strange.
so uncomfortable and so upset also.
Right. Another thing they explore in 50 Shades of Grey is like these problematic power dynamics where it's like someone in a position of power, like a big rich CEO and just like some intern. And it's questionable because there's obviously one person who has a lot of power over the other. And this is going to sound like a bit of a tangent, but there was a big story that came out in 2016 having to do with Vice President Mike Pence at the time. It came out that he had an internal rule where he would never go out for dinner with a woman alone. Like, he would never be just him and a woman. Now, people were wondering, like, why would he do that? It was either one of two things. It was like a religious thing, like it doesn't want to be tempted or whatever.
Right.
Or the other possibility is that it was so that he could avoid these power dynamics, these uncomfortable situations, right? Meanwhile, 50 Shades of Grey is super popular, arguably fetishizing these exact problematic power dynamics.
Yes. And in politics, it's real.
Yes,
But
it's
in 50
absolutely
Shades,
real.
it's role play.
Yeah. In Mike Pence's case, it's a lot more understandable.
Yes.
Whereas in 50 Shades of Grey, it's like, yeah, it's, well, it still could be seen as problematic because
Oh, sure.
it's, if you're fetishizing it, you're kind of tacitly endorsing it.
And the idea of role play is like the power dynamics that exist in real life that we're taking and making into fantasy, right?
Yes, but that it's just that fantasy, right? As long as you don't, you still understand that it's problematic in like a business setting or politics setting.
Okay, I can tell you guys about a book that I started reading.
Oh, here's Nasreen with the
Yes.
juicy synopsis of a book again.
I need to hear this, yeah.
Okay.
I found this on Bookstagram.
What?
And
Wait, can you first tell
Yeah.
us about Bookstagram?
okay, Bookstagram is where people recommend books on Instagram.
Oh, I should have known that.
I was like, okay, let's look at, because we got into Taboo books and I was just so intrigued and I was like interested in getting into those books. And I found this book and it's actually messed up in so many ways. It's twisted, it's edgy, as we explored last time, and it's called Untouchable by Sam Mariano. I don't know if you guys started reading this book, but
No.
okay, they're high schoolers. Let me start this off. They're high schoolers, and that's why it starts off with it being so messed up because they're still young, and it's about a guy sexually assaulting a girl, and she decides that if she doesn't pursue this relationship with him, she'll be responsible for any other woman he might potentially assault. And so she pursues this relationship with him.
What?
So she's trying to pursue this relationship so she can avoid any other sexual assault that he might explore, kind of thing, with any other girl. And she feels like she's being the hero here, which is so wrong. I want to highlight that this is very, very wrong.
Mm.
Nobody thinks like that. This is one of those books that I'm like, what did I start reading in the middle?
Well, there's a lot
Yeah.
to unpack there. I mean,
There's a
when you're
lot
going
to
through traumatic
unpack, yeah.
situations like that, you can process in all sorts of different ways. And in a weird way, that kind of reaction seems almost plausible.
Like psychologically?
Yeah, that's what makes it kind of
Yeah.
uncomfortable, eh?
It makes it uncomfortable because they're also very young. Like, you guys are talking about high schoolers here. And some people read these books and they're like, oh, this is dark romance. This is not romance. Let's point that out. I don't like how young girls can potentially look at this as dark romance and people can potentially pursue these kind of relationships. This is very toxic.
It's
You
interesting,
get what
right?
I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the
Yeah.
labeling of can be very controversial, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily saying that something is right or wrong, but it's like the biases that we come from, which some people
Yeah.
might say this is super unhealthy to label that as romantic, and then other people might say, yeah, but there are elements that even if it is misconstrued, there are elements of romance in this.
Yeah, and I
It's
feel like
uncomfortable.
it's very uncomfortable.
It's like when you're
But,
going and
you know-
watching like thrillers, like psychological thrillers of some sort. You know, you're
Yeah.
not necessarily going and thinking, yeah, this stuff is good for me. It's very disturbing. Like You. You know the
Yeah.
book series You?
Mhm.
Oh, we got to get the
Like,
author for that.
Just the idea of young girls looking at
Mhm.
this kind of romance and being like, I want this kind of romance. I want this relationship. Even though, he bullies her, he does this to her, he abuses her.
Yeah.
But
Because you're
they
worried
still
that people may
pursue
not
it.
be able to separate the
Exactly.
good from
And I
the
feel
ugly.
like these are very controversial books that counts as a taboo topic as well.
Oh, no doubt. No
Mhm.
doubt it's taboo. And
Mhm.
I think that's why it's attracting so much attention. Like, it's labeled as dark romance, but is it marketed towards young adults? Like, is it YA?
Yeah, it
What would
would
you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah. it
typically
is.
these kind of things are marketed as YA.
Mhm.
Oh, God.
I know.
That's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
It is.
But then we beg the question, okay, how about censorship then, right? Like, are we really going to say read or don't read? Do we take these off shelves, or we just put the rating on and then?
No, there's so much
Just
worse
put
out
the
there,
rating
though.
on. Just put the rating on.
Mm.
Censorship doesn't work. People are going to find it regardless.
Yeah, I know.
I feel like even if you take it off bookshelves, there's so much worse that are still on the bookshelves.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
Oh, we're getting into the iffy side of things, guys. Okay, all right. Shall we let people know what's coming up on Sela? Let's do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Here are the 3 titles that are up there at the Center for Equitable Library Access, which you can find at celalibrary.ca. These are the 3 featured titles, okay? Nice and organized by heading here for you. Number 1 is The Whispers by Ashley Audrain, which we reviewed last week. Super fun time. No, the week before that. My goodness. And the second one up there is The Wager by David Graham, which is a history title. And the last one is The Misses by E.L. James, which is a romance. So I guess E.L. James is still...
E.L. James.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, coincidentally.
Still
Wow.
doing things. I know. The Misses. Does that sound provocative enough? I don't know. Probably. And it's categorized as a romance. So hit us up with your opinions on whether it should
Dark
be or not.
romance or standard?
Just romance. Just keeping it generic,
Just regular.
James.
Oh, my God.
Okay. We're going to switch gears for a couple minutes before we get into Know Your Narrator with Sara Hillis after the break. And this is part of a conversation that I had with Bill Shackleton back in August. August seems like a while back. So here we go. Let's listen to the clip, and it's about one of Billy's experiences regarding books, and then we'll get into a chat. Did you spend a lot of time in libraries as a blind person?
Not specifically in libraries, but I certainly borrowed books for many, 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 many years from the public library and, of course, the CNIB.
And did you find your experience difficult, challenging, pretty straightforward? Because, for me, like growing up with low vision, I didn't think that the library was very accessible. They didn't have a lot of books or formats that made sense to me that I could read, but I enjoyed going to a library because it was quiet. That was the only reason why I would end up at a library. I enjoyed that quiet, which I never got in the house.
I never had a problem with cassettes at all. I mean, there are all kinds of my. They used to send me like 5 or 10 books at a time, and no, I never had a.
With the
I didn't.
CNIB library, yeah.
Yeah,
Did you ever
and
walk
then
over to your neighborhood library?
no, I
Mm,
didn't. Because what I did was they have, and I guess they still do a main library where they would send all the books from. So there was a main circulation one, and then one main library had tons of the books, and they just sent them out.
mm,
And there was a bookmobile they called it. And
right.
what they would do is they would stop at a plaza near where I used to live, and I used to get down there and get the books from there. They'd have the books in bags, and you just get them.
Oh, see, that's fun. That
Oh yeah.
sounds so interactive to me. Like, even if you're not necessarily picking up books that you could read, like physical books. Did you say they had cassettes and such though?
Oh
Like
yeah.
audio talking books?
Absolutely. Oh
Oh
yeah.
my god, amazing! But they also had physical books. The bookmobile.
They did. They would
Yeah,
have. They did. They did.
right, right. So even if you're not necessarily going and finding everything you like, it's kind of like a farmer's market where you're just going for the experience of it
Well, you tell them what kind of books you like, and they do their best,
to
you
try to
know,
accommodate.
to try to accommodate
And
you.
these are books that other people have donated and
I would assume so. A lot of them came from the States. A lot of them came from, yeah. I
right.
don't know. I guess a CNIB in some cases.
Do you remember going with like who you would go to these bookmobiles with?
Oh, my father usually,
Really?
and we pick up 2 or 3 bags of books,
Yeah,
and it's sort of potluck. You never know what you were going to get.
sure. And do you remember actually being part of that experience, picking books, choosing books, talking to the people who were running the bookmobile?
No, because they'd already picked them. They
I
just have
see.
the books in bags, so you just go and
You just
pick up.
grab a bag.
Yeah, grab a bag.
Kind of fun.
Yeah,
That's
you
really fun,
never
Billy.
you
I,
never knew.
I don't think there's any parallel experience that I've had or that people could have now really with this. I guess like things like audiobooks sync, programs and initiatives like that where people are having chats on social media about books that they've chosen or books that are available for free reading, things like that. But it's definitely not the same as the neighborhood stop of the
Not
bookmobile.
really, and there's no need for cassettes. Although I don't even know whether you can still do it.
Yeah, how could you do a digital version of the bookmobile?
You wouldn't. You wouldn't do that. Yeah.
It's like you get a free book in your email inbox.
I guess you just download a book. I mean,
Mm,
now you just download it. I
well,
mean, I don't know
that,
what else.
that's what most of us do.
That was Bill Shackleton, longtime AMI technical producer, talking about how he used to procure books back in the day. Rams,
Mm,
a mobile library?
yeah. Bookmobile?
Bookmobile.
Yeah.
That is super cool.
This sounds like something, that you should, like a retro experience that people should bring up just for the novelty of it or the nostalgia of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Just some guy in a big white van with
Yes.
like those sliding doors, and it's like, there's just shelves and shelves of books in there.
You can't say white van without sounding suspicious
You
anymore.
looking for some
but
books, kids?
don't do this, Jacob.
But no,
yes,
real
yes,
talk
yeah,
though,
yeah.
we've always romanticized book distribution.
Mhm.
Like there's this idealistic image of a library, and there's always these articles being written about like new ways of books being distributed or free book programs, and we're always so proud of that stuff. And just reading in general is so idealistic, and this bookmobile is exactly that. It's
It's true.
just it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's cute. You have like, I don't know, the bonding sessions with the people you're going with, and I'm not sure if that I'm romanticizing that part of it because, you know, if I'm blind and I'm going with my mom or dad or friends, you're kind of exploring books together. And that seems very different from the way we do books now.
Yeah,
Audible
like just
recommends.
getting a bag full of books that
Yeah.
hasn't been picked out by an algorithm. It's just
Exactly.
like some dude in the back of a van just chucked them together.
Again with the fan.
Yeah, no, why does it have to be a van? Can we get something a little less sketchy?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe like a cart
Yeah, like a
full
U-Haul
of
truck.
book cart.
I was gonna say a bus.
Or a bus.
Bus.
The book bus.
The book bus.
The book bus. It's going to be yellow,
Way nicer.
like school bus vibes. And then we all just sit around and hang out and read together. I kind of like it. It's not as complicated as the library.
The books on the bus go open and close.
It seems like a good a time as any to wrap up this part, guys.
Let's wrap.
Thank
Yeah,
you
please.
so much. All right, we'll be back with Sara Hillis. She has Know Your Narrator for us. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. And we are getting into Know Your Narrator with our friend Sara Hillis, who joins us once a month to feature a notable narrator in the world of audiobooks. And we shout out these voices behind our favorite listens. We haven't gotten to any of our not-so-favorite listens yet, but we're getting to know the fascinating lives and backgrounds of these individuals, which actually are very interesting. And Sarah, you do the research. You bring us the people. And today, we're learning about George Guidall. Unfamiliar to me. Jacob, familiar to you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So why George Guidall? Sarah?
Well, I've known his narration for many years. He's a veteran recorded books narrator, so anybody that follows the recorded books publishing world is familiar with him. He's been doing it since I think the 70s sometime, and he got his start actually with the American Foundation for the Blind in like the mid 60s or somewhere like that. I haven't heard any of those books, but I suppose I could try to find some somewhere. But they're getting superseded along the way, those older books, by newer recordings of, for especially commercial recordings, because a lot of these blindness organizations are, rightly so, I suppose, just getting the rights to use commercial recordings now. So yeah, so he did get his start in the way that a lot of us grew up, you know. And Bill was talking the other week about all the talking books he remembered, and yeah, so he might know George Guidall. I don't know.
And we've talked about narrators who've done a lot of work. I mean, this man sounds like the GOAT. He's read how many books?
Over 1,700.
That's pretty wild.
He has
For
480 available on Audible alone right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's huge. Okay. And tell us more about like where he started or how far this gig has taken him. Clearly.
Well, he was born in New Jersey in 1938. Went into theater, basically bucking the trend of his family, who just basically had jobs. Like his dad is a pharmacist, and he just wanted to be an actor, so he did that. Hung out in New York, did a lot of on and off Broadway plays. He was in Neil Simon's Chapter 2 for one thing, on some run of it or other, and he's just been around the scene for many years. Did some acting on many daytime soaps. I don't have a list, but a lot of these New York actors go on the daytime soap operas because they can get some money for a few months or a few weeks. And when he was on one of the daytime soaps, he was really annoyed at the soap and the character. Like, oh, I just hate this. He's in his mid-20s or something. So it's a really old daytime soap. And one of the, like maybe the Guiding Light or something, I don't know. But one of the actors said, do you think you're a professional? And he said, yeah, I am. I get paid for what I do. And he said, that's not being a professional.
Ooh.
Being a professional is loving what you do, even when you don't love doing it.
Yeah, we got to sit with that one for a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. What do you think about that, Rams?
I mean, a lot of the business conversations I've had talk about that, right? Like, even if you're not getting paid, you got to love what you do. But I think right now, especially in the side gig economy, it's hard because so many narrators are doing like a lot of different things, and I'm sure they love some level of what they do in everything. But is it really the case all the time?
I always assumed that being a professional meant that you do it for a living.
Yeah, and do
Right.
it well.
I suppose. I guess it's all relative.
Yeah. Well, you have to know because
You can be employed but not do it well. Still makes you a professional.
Oh no, I gotta disagree. Are you a professional if you don't do it well, just because you're getting paid for it?
I think so. Absolutely.
I think you're a paid person. I think that
Exactly.
being a-
Niz, jump
being
in
a-
here.
okay, fine.
Yeah, I
being
don't
a-
agree with that. I don't.
You're a
I don't
paid
think that you're a professional just because you're a paid person.
Yeah.
That's not.
A bunch of
That
us are
doesn't
getting
make
paid
you
for
a
a bunch of
professional.
stuff
So professional just means that you're really good at what you do.
and getting paid for it.
Yeah, that is a
Okay, well, if I'm
necessary
really
element.
good at Super Mario, does
Oh.
that mean you're a professional Mario player?
If you're getting paid for it.
Exactly.
Oh,
That's
wait,
what I'm saying.
wait, okay,
you just
wait.
proved my point.
No,
Rams.
Rams.
All right, okay.
Okay, like
So anyway,
tangent over. Go on.
But you just said,
My
Jacob,
goodness.
that you're really good at it. That's what makes you a professional as well. Yeah, you can be getting paid and you're really good at it. Those combinations
right.
make you a professional.
I think we
Lawyer
can all agree
So-
that if you're both A, really good at it, and B, getting paid for it, that
You're a
makes you a
professional.
professional. And that's
Exactly what I've been
exactly
saying.
what this
That was my
narrator
first
is.
line. All right, Sarah, go on.
So the point of what he took from this story and his life and his
George Guidall
career,
is
that-
wondering what the heck
George
we're talking about.
We're still Guidall somewhere along the line here. George Guidall took this piece of advice to mean that even if I'm not happy with the particular thing I'm doing, I owe it to my art to do it well because I love doing what I do. So even when, say, he doesn't get a book that he is overly in love with, he still knows someone else loves it and he has to perform it well and he has to do a good job of it because he has a responsibility to somebody who's listening to that book and saying, I want to hear this guy narrate this book and I want to hear this book narrated well. I don't want to hear it phoned in, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
that's what he took from that. And so so yes, he got to start in commercial narration with recorded books and basically got started with westerns and other things. For some reason, they wanted to give him westerns. He said, yeah, they gave me westerns because I was born in New Jersey and knew nothing about the West. That was sort of his sort of sarcastic way of saying why they gave him the job of doing the Louis L'Amours and the things like that. But
And his
later
New
on-
Jersey accent kind of does come out in his reading, right?
yeah, I think it's sort of a generic New Jersey, New Yorkie kind of thing that he has. I don't even know if he tries to. I find it sort of he softens his R's sometimes a little bit. It's an interesting.
It's hard to tell. Actually,
It's
can
kind of-
we play the sample because I this is an interesting part of the discussion. Like I can't tell, but then I could tell after listening to the sample a second time. So Niz, hit us up.
Riley stood on the balcony, overlooking Main Street, just as one of those fancy new trucks pulled in, all shiny. The kind of truck he wasn't ever going to be able to afford, unless he sold the hotel, and as far as he knew, nobody was buying, especially since Dad had died. Your clock is broken. He'd been fixing the upstairs. It wasn't their season for those kinds of repairs, but when the storm had blown through the other evening, it had taken the railing with it. He'd carried it back up the main stairs and fed it out the door after shoveling the balcony, and was trying to get it secured before the ever-present wind took hold of it again. Standing, he looked down at the native, probably Blackfoot or Assiniboine. "Say what?" The large man in the black duster pointed to the clock on the exterior of the hotel. Its hands read 8:17. "Your clock. It is broken." "It's right twice a day." Making the old joke, he thought about it. "As far as I know, it hasn't ever worked, and I've been remodeling the place for 5 years now."
The sample is from
Yes.
Hell is Empty by Craig Johnson. It's a Walt Longmire book recorded by Recorded Books and used by permission, and it's available at fine audiobook sellers everywhere.
Listeners know we're still very excited about having samples because it's like the second sample we played on the show. So
It's something to be proud of.
yeah, of course. Okay, so does this sound like a New Jersey accent to you guys? And yes.
Not quite to me, honestly. Though I have a sneaking suspicion that that's because of the setting of the book. Sarah, can you tell us where this book is set?
It's set in Wyoming, so
That's West E.
at least usually
right?
it's set in Wyoming. He that's his typical accent. I sort
yeah?
of feel like it's his typical sort of acting accent, maybe.
Right. That is a thing,
Yeah.
right? Because if you have a very distinguished accent like somebody from New Jersey would, and when you're doing your acting gigs, you're not necessarily going to be talking
Right.
like that, right? It's too pronounced. It's too obvious, right?
Do you find as well the pacing makes it more or less difficult? Like I feel that if he was, reading faster, or maybe you can talk about this, Sarah, in his older recordings when he was younger, if you can tell the accent differently or closer to New Jersey.
I don't find it a New Jersey accent. I find it a sort of random Northeast American kind of accent to me. It's kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of things, I think. And in his older recordings, that is when he's younger, in recordings recorded when he was younger, his diction is so good that you're always understanding what he's saying. Like I've never had a problem with it. Right now we can hear he did this in 2022, so you
Yep.
can hear he's 85 now. Like he was 84 then, but he's in his 80s, and you can kind of hear that's changing slightly just because he's older. And these things happen, I guess, as one ages.
Can you
But,
speak to his versatility?
Yeah, he has narrated classics, a very awesome version of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which is huge and tons of characters, and you always know where you are with him. It's great. He's narrated mysteries like Longmire. He's narrated history, like This Big Wonderful Thing, which is a big, huge history of Texas. He's narrated fantasy, like Neil Gaiman's American Gods. He did a version of that. Just tons of different stuff.
I
over
saw
the
you also did
years.
the Dark Tower series by Stephen King.
Oh,
He did too. I haven't been reading the audio versions of that, but yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that because you're reading the Braille versions?
yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And
yes.
Do you ever do both at the same time, Braille and
I
audio?
have before. Yeah, the audio. The problem with the audio is that there aren't the same narrator for the whole series, and it bothers me.
Oh, I hate that.
Dark Tower specifically? Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
disjointed.
Why do they
Yeah,
do
I
that?
cannot get behind that.
That's
It's
such
the
a huge
worst.
series, too. Like, it's very well known. Why would they
Yeah.
not think ahead to just make the same person read every book?
Well, I think there's always
don't
this
know.
dilemma with old series where when they recorded the audiobooks like in the 90s or something, or in the 80s or 90s, before audiobooks were huge, it come like 2015, 2020, there's this dilemma like, do we re-record it or not?
Yes.
Because we already have a perfectly good audiobook.
No.
And especially in fantasy, these books are like 30 hours long.
Absolutely,
Like,
we
it's a
record
huge
it.
ordeal. I agree with you. They should re-record it, but I've come across a ton of old books that I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, these books are still super relevant. Recorded in 1988. Great. It was probably recorded on tape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
seriously, for more than one reason, please re-record these books and use the same narrator. I get annoyed with audio describers being changed throughout different seasons of series. I can't imagine like getting so invested in a 30-hour book and then the next 30-hour book is like a whole new person. No, no, no. Sarah, how does he prep for his reads? Did he talk about this?
Yeah, he does read his books. Obviously, most narrators do, but with the smaller books, he kind of tends to skim them a little, just because he's so busy, and he finds the arc of the story and the main characters and what kind of conflicts they're dealing with, and then he kind of wants to be as spontaneous as he can with some of the smaller books in the studio. So he sort of reads enough to understand it. He gets, to the end, but he doesn't like read it in depth. Then in the studio, he just starts speaking, and then his engineer will say, okay, that's good, that's not good, and then he'll just keep on going. He wants to just let it out on the day, kind of thing. Whatever happens then happens then. He doesn't like too much, prepping in that sense. With classics, though, he's really meticulous. He wants to be sure that everybody is going to, like what he's doing because it is a classic.
It's
He
the
wants it to
pressure.
be pronounced right and everything like that, right? So, yeah, he
Yeah,
has a
with any kind of
responsibility to
classic
that.
literature, I think as a narrator, you have the pressure of, as with any other art, right? Like you're redoing something that's already well known. The critique that you're probably going to face is, existent. And so you feel the pressure, especially with someone like him who's doing a lot.
There's also a level
Yeah.
of prestigiousness that comes with being selected to
Yes.
read classics and also really popular books. Like, I don't know, let me think of any popular book that's coming up. I don't know, the next book in the Game of Thrones series, if it ever comes out. Whoever gets selected to
Don't
read
do
that
this, Jacob.
audiobook is going to be instantly famous.
Yeah, it's true. Definitely true. Okay, so he talks to that. The difference of reading something that's, very, very reputable versus something that he's just doing.
Yeah, I think for some of the fantasy and the history and the mystery rather, this sort of shorter books, I think he just doesn't want to be too tied down because he think they're also kind of fun most of the time, and he wants to make sure that he can be free to do what needs to be done. He talks a lot about supporting characters and how they can be a little more colorful vocal wise, but the main characters have to be, as carefully done as possible so that they don't sound over the top. They're telling the story, or they're the ones that are talking the most, and you want them to be good but not ridiculous sounding. But some of the supporting characters, you can make them sound more colorful because that makes them more vivid to the reader as well. And yeah, he calls it vocal portraits.
Oh, that's nice. I
Yeah.
wonder too, like if you were to pick something completely out of your default or comfort zone for the main character, right? Just vocally, how exhausting it would be to maintain that throughout an entire book or series.
Oh yeah, crazy exhausting.
Yeah, that just doesn't sound
Crazy.
realistic to me.
Especially considering that he does it like the day of. Like he doesn't even prepare that much, sounds like.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
doesn't tend to, like some narrators we've talked about, totally mark up their scripts like this character sounds like whatever they need to see to be able to do it right, and he just kind of gets it in his head vaguely, and then he puts it out there as he does, on any given time.
I can imagine that being a good narrator means that you also need to be a very good reader. He needs to fundamentally understand what's happening in the text that he's reading to be able to portray it, to interpret it properly, right?
Yeah, this is interesting, actually. He says that he never read during his childhood and high school times
What?
and stuff. He never read books. Like he
That's
never
right. See,
really.
there are people who haven't read
His mom kept
in
saying,
elementary school.
"George, you have to read. You have to read. Like, why aren't you reading books? Like, you should read." And it's only when he became an actor that, of course, he had to start reading plays. And it's only when he read things. He read what he had to read, but he didn't read for pleasure, really, right? And then once he started narrating books, he said, "I understand the power of words now that I have to perform them." And now he loves books.
It's very interesting that he only started reading when it became part of his job. You know how we talk about like, oh, the worst part of my job is, or like the things you have to put up with because you love this job. Like as a teacher, you got a mark, which is not fun, but you love teaching.
No.
This guy's like, I have to read for my reading job.
Where's the worst part of your job? Yeah, reading.
But thank goodness I love narrating. That's pretty funny. This is an interesting point that Sarah, you wanted to bring up, but like when he got started, there weren't many narrators. He's been doing this for decades, and he's got a whole lot of reading under his belt, narration. But when he got started, it's not like every other person could narrate. Now we have tons and tons of narrators and tons of versions of books that are narrated by, more than one option, right, of a narrator. But he got to start when it wasn't really that everyone was narrating.
Yeah, I mean, audiobooks, I mean, unabridged audiobooks, it was hard to find any of those around until recorded books really got going.
Mm.
A lot of places said, well, we don't, they've already read the book, but this is a sort of listen along kind of feature. So let's do abridgments, which, they didn't even mention chapter names or anything. It was just kind of,
Oh.
here's the little, 2-cassette book or something, you know. And so a lot of places were doing that. And then recorded books and a couple other things like Blackstone audio and stuff came along and said, we're not going to do that. We're going to do unabridged recordings. And so slowly the commercial audiobook market got bigger. But yeah, in the beginning there were like only sort of a few narrators, most of whom I would say had come from the talking book world, and some of whom hadn't, but most of them had. And so yeah, you build up quite a lot of books if you're only one of, I don't know,
Right.
10 or 12 or 20 whatever working narrators. Now there's all these people who like might narrate one book a year, but they have like another job doing, I don't know, graphic design or something
Sure.
like that. Like
Just as a
like
side
it's
gig
like,
there. Yeah.
yeah. And of course the whole landscape has changed where there's a lot of people just recording from home and
Oh,
sending
yeah.
in files. And George he's like, I don't want to do that. I want an engineer with me. I want a director with me. I think that I do better work if someone else is looking over my shoulder. He told a really interesting story, a sad story, really. He narrated Night by Elie Wiesel, which is a wonderful book, but it's a horrible book to get through if you're at all emotional. It's Elie
Mm.
Wiesel's memories of the Holocaust and
Okay.
concentration camps. And he asked his engineer, who was a woman, a young woman in her 20s, he said, like, do you know about the Holocaust? This is going to be a difficult book. She said, well, yeah, we did a unit of it in school, in college, kind of thing. And he's like, okay, well, I hope you'll be okay. And within the first 100 pages, she was just in absolute tears. She couldn't see the copy. She couldn't see, she couldn't do it. They had to get a new engineer because she just hadn't really known about it. Like when you read someone's personal memoir, it's a whole different story
Mm.
than just, this is what happened. And he's Jewish too, but he had to narrate this, and he managed it and he did it. But again, he felt very responsible to Elie Wiesel, and there are people who write to him now even still and say, look, I tried to listen to this book. I've read it before, but I tried to listen to it, and your narration is so good that I can't listen to it.
Ugh. That is rough. I think that speaks to, first of all, this, notion of being able to hand your book off to somebody, or any kind of work, art, off to somebody for collaboration and just trusting them in it. But yeah, it hits very deeply, I'm sure, to then have your work read back to the point where you're like, I can't even listen.
It sounds like he
Yeah.
took that responsibility on, and
Mm.
he managed to get through it.
He did, yeah. Another thing is he loves when authors tell him that when they hear his book, it's like they're reading it for the first time or hearing it for the first time, because he does something that they didn't think would happen, but it gives them a new understanding of their own book. And he thinks that's really great if he can sort of do that for them. That's really cool.
Well, I think having a voice read your book rather than, you reading a print copy of your book or reading it in your own voice just does that, period, right? Because you're listening back as if it's something else, not the thing you wrote.
Right,
There's a bit of a
because
disconnect.
it's clearly somebody else's interpretation of your
Yes.
book, whereas when you're writing it as an author, you're obviously writing it in your head, in your mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's great, though, that people feedback like this. I think that we said this in past conversations, Sarah. It really connects the author to the narrator, to the publisher, whatever. Like, it feels like a project rather than, I wrote this book, dump it off, and whoever narrates it. I love that it's all part of the process.
Yeah, I think it depends on the author and the narrator and the publisher and whatever. But the other thing, he really loves getting fan letters, and he gets fan letters that say, you really helped me. I was ill in bed for 3 weeks, and I listened to this really long book, and you were there all the time, even though I was sick. Or just having a tough time or being alone or just having my life, as being my life. You've helped me pass the time. He really likes hearing from fans about that. One time he got a fan letter though that said, there's too much, profanity and sex and violence in this book. You don't usually read books like this. So he kind of has made it a bit of a rule that there are books that are George Guidall books, and there are books that are not George
Really?
Guidall. Like not him, but the publisher too. I mean, once he got those letters, he was like, "Well, I don't want to be responsible
No
for people."
way.
He has an image,
thinking-
I guess he wants to uphold, eh?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
involved in reading the Holy Bible, which on Audible is a digestible 102 hours.
Oh, I haven't heard that version before.
102. Triple digits.
Never heard of that. If you want to use up your credit on Audible, that's what you buy it. Get
Actually,
your
that would
money's
be
worth.
totally worth your credit.
Yeah, exactly.
But it makes sense for someone to want to manage their image like that, right? Because like if you have fans, that's very valuable. And if you're pissing off your fans, they're not going to come back, right?
Well, once you read the Bible, you can't really.
He didn't read the whole thing, to be clear. Like they had a
right.
bunch of different readers for that one.
No.
Well, I have a story about a whole other narrator called Alexander Scorby. He still has an award named after him from the American Foundation for the Blind because he read the entire King James Holy Bible in the 40s or 50s. And then I heard him read The Great Gatsby, and there's all these, profanity in there. And it's a great book. But I was like, this doesn't sound right. And yet he did it really well.
We're
But I was just like,
typecasting our
wow.
narrators.
Yeah, exactly.
Unreal.
He's just an actor like anybody else.
Yeah,
but-
exactly. No, but it's true. It gets ingrained, right? I don't know what it is about voices, but it's just stuck in your head that way, and you just can't. It takes so long to unravel.
Although it's probably easier to picture like a New Jersey accent saying a bunch of profanity than something more standard.
Yeah. He's on the side of the wrong reputation. He should go more for the profanity.
Yeah. When I first encountered him, I didn't know he was a narrator. I thought he was just some like flunky at recorded books because all I ever heard was, "This is Tess of the D'Urbervilles, narrated by Davina Porter, and Thomas Hardy was blah blah blah," or whatever it
Oh,
was.
like
It
he'd do
wasn't
the
that
intro
one. It was
kind
a
of
different.
things?
Yeah, he like what they did for a while was have another narrator do an
Ah.
intro, and then
Promote,
the
yeah.
actual narrator read the book. And so. So for a while there, he was the only person I heard doing the intros
This
of
is
these
the guy who didn't
books,
make it.
and I never heard him read a full novel until a little later, and I was like, "Oh, he's like an actor guy."
Yeah.
Okay.
And also he has like 1,700 books.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah,
Well,
Literally
at the
the
time, it might have been
furthest
like
thing.
500.
Right. From the flunky of recorded books. I love that.
It's funny.
Tell us about his social work. He's
Well,
giving
he
back to the community?
apparently when he was 50, he got a master's in social work, and I don't know how long he did this for, but he did counseling in the day and then did his acting stuff at night. And who knows when he did the narration? I don't know, but he would have been narrating by this point. So yeah, he I don't know how long. Again, this was one of his careers, but obviously he did it. And so he was a counselor. I don't know if he's a good counselor or a bad counselor or whatever.
But he's doing things in a similar vein, right? Like the talks or presentations that he gives at libraries and conferences.
Yeah, he has a presentation called "The Art and Artifice of Audiobook Narration," and someone said, "Well, there's a library in New Jersey that wants to hear a book narrator. Can you do it?" This was in like the 70s, and he's like, "Why would I want to talk to a library? What's the point of this?" But he walks in the room, and everybody's like, "It's George Guidall. He's narrated, whatever he narrated, at the time." And so everybody sort of knew him, and he was like, "Hey, that's cool." So he had no idea he was like a well-known narrator at that point,
That's lovely. I think that that's nice because we have so many conversations about narrators now, but I don't think that conversation was necessarily accessible before a given point, where people could say, "I love this narrator. I love storytelling this way," and things like that.
Well, yeah, and audiobooks were kind of niche too because they were like $100 a book.
Whoa.
Or maybe not quite, but they were quite expensive to buy those, and you had to mail away for them, and like it wasn't just
And
you
who
didn't
was
go
really
to a
using
store,
them, right? Not everybody.
No, it was like busy people, I guess. Who I don't know. It was really niche back then.
I
Though.
mean, at one point they had them on vinyl records, right? And then on tape. Like those mediums are expensive just to start with.
That's
so
true.
like the versatility that comes with doing stuff digitally is like you can't deny it.
Yeah.
Sarah, any final words on George Guidall?
Oh, just that. I mean, I just think he's one of our greatest narrators. I don't know how much longer he can do it for, but he seems to be having no sign of stopping. He had a book come out this month called The Longmire Defense, so another Longmire. And next month in October, he's got a Philip Roth book called Exit Ghost coming out. So he's still doing it.
Fantastic. And now we have another narrator in the books. Sarah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
It's always fun, and it's always fun actually playing samples and talking around that as well. Sara Hillis for Know Your Narrator, and we check in with her, give or take, once a month and find out about the voices of our audiobook listens and the backgrounds and interesting ways that they narrate our audiobooks. Next week on AMI Audiobook Review, stay tuned for chats with two avid audiobook listeners, not just one. We have Jenny Bovard and Karen McGee, friends from AMI, joining us. They have book recommendations, and I think we have a fun game planned. Looking forward to that. And that's a wrap. I'm Ramia Amuddin, host of the show with co-host Jacob Szymanski and technical producer Nasreen Abdelmajid. We will be back in a week, and until then, happy audiobook listening.